After the surrender of Nazi Germany, the Americans were still battling fiercely against the Japanese. The Americans wanted a quick end to the conflict. However, the Japanese were prepared to fight to the death. In New Mexico, engineers developed a weapon that was unlike any other, an atomic bomb. When the bomb was introduced to Harry Truman, who was the current president, he agreed to use it, but only if it was necessary. The Japanese were offered a chance to surrender their army, and they refused. Now these events came to pass, and the Americans decided that it was time to bomb Japan. They chose two of the islands that have not been firebombed recently, and they decided on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Both of them were highly populated cities. The Americans dropped the bomb on Hiroshima August 6th, and dropped on Nagasaki on August 9th. More than 70,000 people died in each of the cities, and the Japanese army surrendered.
A lot of people are arguing over if this was a just cause to drop the bombs. Is this conflict a response to a wrong perpetrated? From the American perspective, there was a just cause to drop the bombs. The United States had demanded that Japan surrender prior to the bombings, but Japan refused. The United States were forced to take extreme measures to show the Japanese that they wanted to end the war by any means necessary.
Was this conflict made by legitimate public authority, and was the decision made by this public authority legitimate? I do believe so. Harry Truman, the President of the United States at the time of the dropping of the atomic bombs, made the executive decision to drop the weapons of mass destruction on Japan. The decision was legitimate because the U.S. needed to stop more casualties from occurring, and an appropriate resolution needed to be made.
The attack on Hiroshima and Nagasaki was a justifiable attack. It was not done out of vengeance or hate. It was done because the Japanese were fierce and dangerous, and they were willing to fight a war until there were no survivors. The Americans, on the other hand, had no desire to fight, and there was no bloodlust among their army. They bombed them to end a bloody war, so the bombing was justifiable.
Are the ends not proportionate to the damage inflicted on the harm done? The Americans destroyed thousands of lives when they destroyed the cities of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Destroying those cities were horrible and not a great thing to do, but when you look at what would have happened if those bombs were not dropped, it shows that these bombs possibly saved many American and Japanese lives. Both of the decisions made were horrible, but when you look at the lesser of evils, the bombings were the right decision to make because of the possibility of this war going on for a long period of time and killing many other people. Yes, many Japanese civilians were killed, but for the Americans, they weren't as valued as the death of many American lives.
Okay. Was the use of force of dropping the atomic bombs the last resort? Yes, because the dropping of the nuclear bombs was considered the last resort for the Americans. Island hopping was not being proven successful enough because too many U.S. soldiers were dying and losing their lives. The United States had to propose an ultimatum to Japan. They said, surrender yourselves or face grave consequences.
Many people ask, was the bombing of Hiroshima an action with a hope of success? When bombing the Japanese, there was a chance of the Americans ending the war, which was their ultimate goal. By bombing the Japanese, the chances that they would lose hope and surrender were huge, and the Americans took a chance and they ultimately ended the conflict. So they did achieve their goal.
Aim of peace. Is every reason behind the use of force aimed at returning to a peaceful, settled, and better world? Yes, the United States sought to save many lives. By dropping the atomic bomb, they were able to force Japan to surrender, and they were able to save the lives of American troops and people. Proportionality of means. Are the means that are applied against the enemy proportionate to the means used against the U.S.? No. The United States took to more extreme measures than Japan did. Although Japan had attacked Pearl Harbor and killed American troops, the nuclear bomb not only killed Japanese troops, but also killed thousands of civilians. The bombings and the after effects were far worse than the U.S. had intended.
Are only the combatants targets of the means of the war? Since WMDs were used, combatants were not the only targets of the war. In order to end the war, the U.S. couldn't keep hopping from island to island and trying to take over them, because the Japanese would have never surrendered. But by dropping bombs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it showed that the U.S. were going to target civilians and destroy cities in order to show the Japanese that they would destroy their country if they did not surrender.
Was this a just war? From an American point of view, the bombing of both Hiroshima and Nagasaki was justified and a legitimate course of action. It was retaliation and self-defense from the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Without the destruction of these two cities, the war would have an inconceivable end and a large death toll. This was last straw for the U.S. By dropping the two A-bombs in Japan, the United States believed that this would be better for the common good of its own citizens. As well, Japanese soldiers and non-combatants' lives were the cost to make sure that citizens of the U.S. were safe. By causing Japanese to surrender, the Americans ended a vital issue and stopped the bloodiest war in history. Boom.